If a woman with no memory holds the key to unlocking a parallel world, would you save her or run from her in fear? Waves crash against the shore. Wind rustles through the trees. And in the dark, she opens her eyes. No name, no past. But in her hand, a glowing pendant. Every time she touches it, time fractures. They say it's just a hallucination. But what about you? If she entered your life just as everything was falling apart, would you believe in fate or turn your back on it? Before the story begins, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next unraveling mystery. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if that stranger turned out to be the mirror of a soul you'd forgotten? Now let's begin our story in Seabrook Hollow. On a storm-torn night along the windswept coast of Seabrook Hollow, fisherman Alexander Pierce was pulling in his nets near Hollow Crest Point when he saw it. A motionless figure drifting toward the shore. The wind howled, waves crashed violently, and in the flickering haze of his weather-beaten spotlight, he saw her, a young woman soaked to the bone, unconscious, clutching a pendant that glowed with an unnatural light. No ID, no wounds. But when she opened her eyes, there was something far more haunting, an endless void staring back at him. She didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from. The only thing she remembered was a knock inside her head every night. 3 short beats, 1 long pause. Then silence, as if time itself had stopped to listen. Alexander tried to take her to the hospital, but strangely, every time she touched the pendant, all nearby electronics instantly died. The lights, the compass, the radio, even his wristwatch froze. Something was off, deeply off. And then, in one fleeting moment, as Alexander draped his coat over her, beneath the crumbling porch of the old boathouse, she looked up at him with eyes so distant, so overwhelmed. It was as if she had just seen him die. Somewhere else, in a world no one knew existed. He didn't believe in destiny. She didn't believe in herself. But from that moment on, they were entangled in something irreversible, a chain of events that didn't belong to the present and followed none of this world's rules. And hanging in the silence of that rain-soaked night was a single question. If you met a stranger whose touch could bend the laws of time, would you save them or let them vanish as if they were never real at all? The woman had no name, no ID, no past. She was taken to Blue Haven Clinic, an old, weather-worn medical outpost tucked along a misty hillside, where warmth lingered in the walls and where Dr. Genevieve Clark remained one of the few who still believed that not everything could be explained by science. Genevieve didn't pry. She didn't force memories. She simply cared for her with quiet compassion, always leaving behind a steaming cup of tea and a handwritten note. Memories don't need to be chased. They return when the heart is ready. Meanwhile, Alexander Pierce, the fisherman who had pulled her from the sea, began returning to the clinic every evening, not to talk, not even to stay long, just to leave behind a freshly knitted scarf or a few slices of warm toast. He didn't have a reason he could name, only a feeling, like he owed her something. Or maybe, just maybe, he was afraid that if she disappeared again, he'd never get the chance to ask, "Why do your eyes look at me? Like they've known me in another life." She didn't speak much, but at night she dreamed. In her dreams, she stood in a corridor of mirrors, endless reflections. Each mirror showed a different reality. In one, she was a warrior, in another, a grieving mother. But in all of them, there was a man with familiar eyes, eyes that looked just like Alexander's. Once, when Genevieve collapsed from a mild stroke, the woman, still unable to remember her own name, panicked so fiercely that she found her way out of the clinic, walked nearly 5 kilometers in the pouring rain, and called for an ambulance. That was the first time Alexander saw her cry. Not for herself, but for someone else. "She may not remember who she is," Genevieve said gently when she regained consciousness. "But her heart never forgot how to love." And it was that, more than anything, that made Alexander start to believe that some memories don't need names, that some connections go deeper than words, and that some people, even if you've never met them before, still leave a mark on your heart, as if they've been there forever. When she awoke, she chose the name Victoria Langley, drawn from the faint engraving etched into the pendant Alexander had found around her neck. The inscription was so fine it almost disappeared in the light, but each time her fingers touched it, it warmed, as if it were alive. Days later, as a second storm rolled in from the sea, something strange washed into the bay. It wasn't debris from a fishing boat, but a sleek black shard of a vessel bearing an eerie red emblem, SD, the Silent Depths. That same night, Victoria dreamed again, this time of running through cold steel corridors, chased by something unseen. Thousands of versions of herself lined the halls, all screaming, all trying to escape a machine of light. In the waking world, Alexander began investigating the mysterious vessel, following traces of sub-frequency radio signals. That's when he met a man, Gabriel Vaughn, who claimed to be a former researcher on Project Ecliptica, a quantum initiative linking human memory to submarine control systems. She's not ordinary, Gabriel said. She's the root code, the first iteration, and the only one capable of reopening the gateway, what Oracle's been hunting for. Before Alexander could fully grasp what that meant, he was drugged. When he came to, he was tied up in an underground chamber. Above ground, Victoria was being forcibly taken to Ashenroot, an abandoned facility built into the cliffs, once a testing ground for memory experimentation. Gabriel, once an ally of Damian Blackwood, had long since sold his soul to something else. "The world doesn't need true memories," he said coldly. "We only need a version that can be controlled." As the connection device was about to be clamped onto Victoria's neck, she turned, just enough to see Alexander in the shadows, breaking free and inching his way down the corridor. Their eyes met. One single flicker of trust, of recognition, of something deeper than identity. As if across every unraveling version of reality, they had always found each other. And in that breathless moment, Genevieve appeared, alone, standing at the heart of the control room, holding a frayed electrical wire, already sparking. She had cut the facility's main power, sacrificing herself to buy Victoria just a few precious minutes to escape. "Go," she whispered. "Don't let them tell you who you are." It was the last time they ever saw her, Genevieve fading into the shimmer of pulsing blue light, like a soul that had finally finished its journey. The town began to whisper. Rumors spread like mist. People said the girl carried a form of encrypted memory, something no scanner could decipher. But Victoria didn't care about the murmurs. What consumed her were the dreams, endless, repeating, where a massive door made of light slammed shut just as she reached it. Alexander came to understand that even if her memories hadn't returned, the emotions inside her, her compassion, her quiet strength, were real. He made a choice. Together they left the town under cover of night, heading for the ruins of Ecliptica Base, the once secret center for memory research and parallel reality studies. Through fog-laced forests, past relics of signal detectors still pulsing weakly, they journeyed. And at last they stood before the sealed underground vault, its entry bound by a now-defunct biosignature system. Only one key remained: Damian Blackwood, the man who had once been lead engineer, now just a fragment of consciousness drifting inside an ancient quantum framework. When Victoria touched the control panel, he appeared, like a ghost carved from static, and said, "You are the first quantum instance. You don't need memory, because you are memory." Alexander stepped back, stunned, and from behind them, Genevieve, who had silently followed, emerged. She understood. For Victoria to pass through the final gate, someone had to hold the collapsing reality in place. She placed her hand against the device. Soft blue light rose, wrapping around her like a tide. "Go," she said, her voice calm. "You need to know why you were created." Victoria cried out in anguish, but Genevieve smiled, serene, as if she'd finally found something worth believing in. Alexander held Victoria as she trembled. For the first time, she didn't resist. She looked back, then turned away. The entrance opened, silent, brilliant, a white light waiting patiently on the other side. One fog-laced morning, Alexander heard the low hum of an engine echoing from the sea. Everyone at the dock turned their eyes to the horizon. A massive, pitch-black vessel, the Silent Depths, was rising from the ocean's depths. No signal, No flag, no identity. But someone in town had been waiting for it, and that someone didn't belong here. That night, Victoria was being watched. Every step she took was tracked by silent drones, signalless, hovering like metallic phantoms. She didn't remember them, but they knew exactly what she was. Panicked, Victoria and Alexander fled the town, heading for Ashenroot, the one sealed facility that had been shut down after a quantum memory experiment went catastrophically wrong. There they found Gabriel Vaughn, the former lead engineer of Ecliptica Base, also the only survivor of the explosion that had fractured reality 3 years earlier. Gabriel didn't attack. He simply said, "This world didn't collapse because of war. It fractured because of your choice." Victoria froze. Alexander gripped her hand tighter, trying to keep her grounded. But Gabriel's voice lowered, almost a whisper. "Oracle has called you back. You're not human. You are the first instance to escape the limits of time." And in that moment, an unidentified strike team stormed Ashenroot. Chaos erupted. Gabriel was shot. Before he lost consciousness, he shoved something into Alexander's hands. A set of original schematics, revealing that this present reality was nothing more than a broken copy of another timeline. For the first time in his life, Alexander didn't know what to believe. But Victoria, she was trembling. She remembered nothing, and yet everything felt achingly familiar. And the gate to Ecliptica Base was opening, not with a key, but with the rhythm of her heartbeat. The leader of the mercenary unit was none other than Gabriel Vaughn, the same face that once hung with honor in the Hall of Recognition at Mira Quantum Corporation. Once hailed as Chief of High Security Operations, he had been handpicked to safeguard the first gateway into quantum reality. But then, one night, without warning, he vanished, along with every trace of data from Project Oracle. Now Gabriel was no longer a guardian. He led a faction of stateless operatives, men without memories embedded with recognition algorithms linked solely to Victoria. To them, she wasn't human. She was a rogue variant, something broken that needed to be recovered. Alexander reached for her hand, ready to run, but Victoria stood still. Her eyes locked onto Gabriel's, unflinching. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I saw you in a dream, but in the dream, you were already dead." Gabriel's reply was barely above a whisper. "That wasn't a dream. That was one of the realities you shattered." Victoria stepped back. The ground beneath her feet began to hum, not an earthquake, but a resonance, pulsing outward from the pendant at her neck. A pale glow spread from it, and in that light, a faint symbol inked on Gabriel's wrist flickered to life. An exact match. From a distance, Genevieve screamed, "Don't let it trigger! She's being reactivated." With no time to hesitate, Genevieve hurled herself between them, her body intercepting the surge of electromagnetic charge. A sharp pulse, a muffled blast, and she collapsed to the floor. Victoria screamed, rushing forward, but Alexander pulled her back. They ran, fleeing the ruin as Ashenroot imploded behind them in a blaze of blinding white light. When they reached the hillside, gasping, Alexander stopped. His hands shook as he pulled the slip of paper Gabriel had stuffed into his coat. There were no words, just a symbol, a dual-ringed circle, and beneath it, a single line etched in ink that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "She does not belong to this reality, but she is its final hope." Amid the blaring alarms and collapsing halls of Ashenroot, as Alexander pulled Victoria through corridors shrouded in smoke and flickering lights, she suddenly stopped. Her body froze. Hands clutched her head, eyes wide, trembling. A flood of images surged through her, blurry but violent in their clarity. A spiraling glass staircase, strings of quantum code drawn into the air like light trails, and a voice, deep, proud, then suddenly soft, like a father. "No one may touch reality until they have learned how to love." Victoria whispered, "Damien, Blackwood." Alexander turned, breathless. "You remember something?" She nodded slowly. "He created me, but he also hid me from the very world he built." Through fractured memories, Victoria saw herself as a 10-year-old girl, clutching the pendant in her hand, standing in the center of a glowing, circular chamber. Damien, whom she called father, knelt before her, voice low. If one day people like Gabriel come after you, don't fight them. They're not evil. They've just forgotten that humanity can't be defined. She collapsed. Smoke rushed in. Explosions thundered from below. Without thinking, Alexander hoisted her onto his back and ran, wild and relentless, toward the emergency exit. Behind them, each heavy metal door slammed shut, groaning like some mechanical beast desperate to bury secrets never meant to surface. Bursting out of Ecliptica Base, they stumbled into the mist-drenched forest, breathless, drenched in ash and silence. Victoria whispered, "Damien isn't dead. He's still alive, in another layer of reality." Alexander turned to her. He didn't question it, didn't need to. His eyes said everything. He believed her, and somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, a voice only Victoria could hear whispered back, "Reality is not just what you see, it's what you're willing to sacrifice." There was no way back. After escaping the ruins of Ecliptica, Alexander, Victoria, and Genevieve followed the faint blueprints left behind in Damien Blackwood's final research. An old passage marked with outdated quantum symbols. It led them to the Ashen Root Passage, a network of tunnels buried deep beneath Seabrook Hollow, cold, silent, and unsettling. Once, these halls had stored the earliest fragments of data from the Oracle program. The first light in the tunnel flickered on with a touch of Victoria's fingerprint. But what made them freeze in their tracks was the door at the far end, etched with the same symbol as the pendant she wore. Genevieve stepped forward, running her hand along the glowing grooves. A DNA code appeared. Then a voice echoed from a wall speaker, stale and synthetic. "Welcome, Quantum Instance 021, Victoria Langley, Legacy Access activated." Alexander turned to her. She said nothing, just bowed her head, her eyes beginning to fill. Before they could move further, a deep rumble echoed from behind. Gabriel and his mercenaries had found them. Without hesitation, Genevieve reached for the metal release lever and slammed it down. The reinforced door sealed behind them, blocking the path and trapping her on the outside. "You are the only chance left," she shouted through the soundproof glass. "Go!" Victoria screamed, reaching for her. But Alexander pulled her back, arms wrapped around her, dragging her into the chamber. They turned in time to see Genevieve place her hand gently against the glass, smiling. Darkness swallowed the corridor behind them. The door marked with the pendant symbol began to open, revealing the original Oracle core, the place where every truth about Victoria waited to be unlocked. But now she would step into it without the one woman who had believed in her more than anyone else. The dim light from Alexander's wrist device cast flickering shadows against dust-laden walls that had not seen motion in centuries. Inside the Ashen Root tunnel, time itself felt suspended. The pursuit had faded. No footsteps, no shouting, only the hush of breath and the uneasy rhythm of two hearts echoing in the silence. Victoria stopped before a carved stone monolith, etched with a spiraling quantum symbol identical to the one on her pendant. On the moss-covered walls, ancient hieroglyphs stretched in tangled patterns, writing that belonged to no known civilization. A map, a warning, a memory. Genevieve's voice crackled softly through the earpiece, fading with every word. Damien once translated those markings. They're remnants of an intelligence that tampered with reality long before humans understood space or time. Victoria reached out, pressing her fingers against one glowing glyph. A mist rose, and from it emerged a half-formed figure, part human, part data. It was a preserved echo of Damien Blackwood, her adoptive father, thought long dead. "Victoria, if you're seeing this, then the memories are returning. You are not just human. You are the bridge between realities." She froze. The recurring dreams, the blinding white light, the whispered voices that had haunted her, now clicked into place like shards finally finding their shape. Alexander watched her, waiting, but Victoria stepped back, gripping the pendant tightly. Her voice trembled. "If all of this is real, then I never had a choice." And at that moment, a section of the tunnel behind them collapsed, blocking the exit. They were sealed in. Only one path remained, forward, deeper. But this time, it was Victoria who led the way, no longer running. At the end of the freezing stone corridor, A rusted metal door emerged like a tear in the fabric between two realities. On its surface, barely visible through the corrosion, were the faded words, Ecliptica Base, Restricted Quantum Domain. Victoria stopped. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out her breath. Every part of her screamed, "Don't go in!" But the pendant on her chest began to glow again, softly, steadily, and the door, as if sensing its rightful owner, slid open on its own. Inside was a world long forgotten. Monitors flickered, quantum maps hovered midair, and at the center of the room sat an empty chair, slowly turning toward them. Beside it stood a replica of Victoria, built from light, from data, from memories that had once been erased. A quantum instance. No soul, yet it was alive. Alexander instinctively stepped back, but Genevieve moved forward, her voice trembling. "Victoria, you're not just a survivor. You're the key to awaken this system or destroy it forever." In the midst of that rising chaos, a trigger activated. The security protocol flared. A countdown began. 20 seconds left for one person to exit before the system split space itself. Genevieve didn't wait for hesitation. She turned, pressed something into Victoria's hand, the final code string. "You were the one chosen. I was only the keeper of the flame." Then, without another word, she dashed out the door and slammed it shut from the outside. The door sealed. A deafening rupture tore through the chamber behind it. Genevieve was gone. Victoria collapsed to her knees. Her hands still clutched the code, and the pendant now blazed with a light fiercer than ever before. Alexander said nothing. He simply lowered himself beside her, his presence steady, silent. And then the voice of the system echoed through the room, calm, emotionless, final. "Are you ready to initiate reality regeneration protocol?" Behind the central chamber of Ecliptica stretched a narrow hallway descending into shadow, a place where Victoria heard whispers that didn't belong to the present, ancient voices layered over each other, echoing her name like a prayer spoken across 100 timelines. As they reached the end, a strange violet light pulsed from an ancient metallic structure embedded in the wall, the Gate of Arcanos. This gate had no keyhole. It didn't respond to code. It resonated with the vibration of the soul. And it was Victoria's pendant, the last surviving quantum artifact from Project Oracle, that awakened it. The moment it lit up, Ecliptica began to tremble. In the control room above, screens flickered wildly, displaying collapsing timelines. If the gate was activated incorrectly, it wouldn't just destroy one dimension, it could collapse the entire network of realities. Alexander turned to her, his eyes filled with something deeper than hope, faith, but he didn't pressure her. "You don't have to save everything," he said quietly. "Just choose the one reality you want to belong to." Victoria stepped forward, hand trembling as she reached for the glowing rim. At that moment, a voice echoed from the system, measured, immutable. "Only one soul may pass through, or the gate will close forever." She turned back to Alexander, but before she could say a word, he smiled and stepped back. "Let me be the one to stay," he whispered. "Be the end, or the beginning this world needs." "No, no, you can't do this," she cried, her voice cracking. But the gate had already accepted the decision. A surge of light engulfed her. Time fractured. Reality fell silent. And when the glow faded, there was only Alexander, standing alone in a reality that was quietly closing in on itself. The Gate of Arcanos didn't just reflect light, it reflected the soul. As Victoria placed her hand on the central symbol, a beam of light shot straight into her chest, unlocking a cascade of memories. Not belonging to one person, but to countless versions of herself across fractured timelines. In a dizzying flash, she saw herself, but not quite herself, living dozens of lives. A star-bound traveler, a girl lost in the chaos of a global plague, a child born in the ruins of war. And in every life, one thing remained the same: the spiral pendant, the mark of Oracle. "You are not just Victoria Langley," a voice echoed through the spiraling void. It was her own voice, but from another reality. "You are the final instance, the last living key." Alexander rushed toward her, trying to steady her swaying body, but a burst of energy threw him back. Her chest glowed, bright, brilliant, not with pain, but with release, with truth. Genevieve had once said, "Love is the deepest form of technology for healing." Now Victoria understood. She didn't just carry memories, she carried the right to choose. And that choice wasn't to escape, it was to confront. The gate began to turn. The room trembled. She whispered to no one, and to every part of herself, "If I am the final instance, then let me be the one to choose reality again." One step, one look, and she crossed the threshold into the place where everything humanity ever questioned about memory, meaning, and the soul would be rewritten. Everett Sinclair didn't come to Ecliptica to understand. He came to claim. As the newly appointed CEO of Quantum Dominion, the very conglomerate once founded by Damian Blackwood, Everett had long since crossed the boundary of ethics. Clad in a dark suit, a cold smile on his lips, he stepped into the central chamber just as the gate of Arcanos pulsed like a living heart. Not a flicker of awe crossed his face. "She's not human," Everett said, eyes fixed on Victoria like a collector sizing up a priceless prototype. "She's the final living key, and this corporation will do what's right for its own future." Alexander's fists clenched, fury rising like fire in his veins. But it was Genevieve, barely standing, her back pressed to the cold wall, who spoke first. If she opens that gate under his command, every reality becomes a tool. Victoria turned to Alexander, the man who had pulled her from the sea, who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Then she faced Everett, the one who had called her it. "So this is what you came for," she said, stepping forward, fingers curling around the pendant now blazing on her chest. "A gateway, or a human being?" Everett raised a hand. Behind him, the quantum security team moved in unison, weapons powered up and trained on them all. No one had time to react. Genevieve moved first, stepping between Victoria and the firing line. In that single breath, a flash of light tore through space, searing, blinding white, and the world fractured again. As the two of them fell, Genevieve's voice whispered in Victoria's ear, steady, knowing, and final. "You are the one who chooses." Everett was thrown back. The gate of Arcanos roared to life, vibrating violently, as if reacting not to commands, not to code, but to something far more volatile: emotion. Victoria knelt beside Genevieve. Her eyes held no tears, only a depth that seemed bottomless. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. She simply placed her hand over the wound of the woman who had believed she was human, not hardware. A few steps away, Alexander stood frozen, blood on his hands, heart pounding so loudly it could shatter bone. He had once believed himself an outsider, a man who'd pulled a stranger from the sea in the middle of a storm. But now, watching Victoria rise under the weight of not just destiny, but sacrifice, he understood. The choice was his. "You don't belong to this world," came a voice behind him. Damien, now only a shimmer of memory rendered in light. His eyes held a sorrow too old for language. "You could return to the harbor, cast your nets, and forget all of this ever happened." Alexander looked toward Victoria, who now walked toward the gate of Arcanos, where Everett was once again summoning something not meant for human hands. "Or," Damien said gently, "you stay and become the last guardian of the threshold." Alexander didn't answer. He just removed his old fisherman's cap, the one that had followed him through storms and silence, and placed it on the worn step of Ecliptica, a quiet farewell to everything he once called ordinary. Then he stepped forward, toward Victoria, and took her hand. "We open it together," he said, "not because they want us to, but because Genevieve believed humanity deserves another way out." The gate of Arcanos didn't open like a door. It tore like a wound through the fabric of existence. On the other side, there was no light, no darkness, only the infinite. Countless versions of Victoria stood in waiting, suspended like echoes in the void. She fell into a fractured space where time curled in on itself like the dying breath of a star. With every step, she met a different her, a woman who pressed a button to destroy a planet out of fear, a child sobbing beside Genevieve's lifeless body, a goddess worshipped as the icon of liberation. and an old woman sitting quietly in a weathered cabin. The gate never opened, the pendant resting silently on a wooden table. Alexander held onto her hand as they slipped through twisting layers of reality, but the quantum pull threatened to rip his soul from his body. "Victoria," he shouted, "no matter who you are, no matter which world you come from, be the one who chooses to save us." She turned, and in that moment, her eyes were no longer her own, but the convergence of a million memories, crashing through her like waves from every possible life. And then, she let go. Alexander tumbled backward, falling through collapsing dimensions, until he landed in Seabrook Hollow, where time began again. But Victoria remained, standing at the center of the spiral, in the eye of fate. And from the storm of all she had been, she chose a single memory to carry with her. The sound of Genevieve's laughter as she once said that kindness might be the strongest science of all. She stepped toward the heart of the gate, opened her palm, and for the first time carried no fear. The final corridor to the Oracle Core pulsed with a cold blue light, like the dying heart of a star. They were almost there, when Gabriel Vaughn's shadow came crashing toward them. No time, no exit, no turning back. Genevieve said nothing. She looked at Alexander, then at Victoria, and in her eyes was a goodbye that touched every memory they had ever shared. Without a word, she turned, pulled the energy pin from the quantum diffuser, and hurled it into the convergence point, triggering an explosion that fractured the rhythm of space, forcing Gabriel to fall back. "Run!" was the last message that echoed through the electromagnetic hum. Alexander grabbed Victoria's hand and pulled her through the quantum gate. No time to look back. On his hand, her blood still lingered, warm, then slowly fading. Inside the Oracle Core, there was no present, only choice. Victoria placed her hand at its center. The echoes of every version of herself rippled forward, and among them, one stood out. A world where Genevieve still lived. A Seabrook Hollow untouched by quantum war. She didn't choose power, she chose memory. And from that memory, she opened the gate. 1 year later, the pendant lay quietly on a wooden table by the window overlooking Seabrook Hollow's ocean. The curtain swayed gently in the breeze, carrying the faint sound of a child's laughter. Alexander sat on the porch, gaze stretched far into the horizon. No one remembered the quantum storm that had once torn through reality, but within him, every moment was proof that their choice had preserved the last thread of humanity. We don't choose where we're born, but we can choose where we belong. Within the quantum vortex, where gravity didn't exist, where time held no dominion, where only memory remained, Victoria stood still in the glow of colliding light. Before her, blurred fragments began to take form, slowly crystallizing into a voice she knew by heart. Damian Blackwood. Not in flesh, but in consciousness. An echo left behind from the moment he sacrificed himself to hide the gate of Arcanos. His face held no age, only sorrow. "You weren't created to open the gate," he said, his voice gentle, heavy. "You were born to choose whether it should be opened at all." Victoria froze. All the data, the experiments, the running, the loss, it had all led here. To one moment no one else could claim, no one else could carry. "Why me?" she asked. "Because only a soul," Damien answered, "can truly understand the worth of reality." And with that, he dissolved into light. A thunderclap of quantum force rumbled from the outer chamber. Alexander stepped beside her, hand resting on her shoulder. He said nothing. He didn't need to. They both knew. They might never come back. She stepped forward. The pendant on her chest began to glow, its light syncing with the rhythm of the core. Around them, space cracked like shattered glass. Through the splintered veil lay infinite strands of possibility, realities where other versions of herself fought, fled, or had already given up. Victoria placed her palm on the central node, and in that instant, her tears didn't fall. They pulled backward, tracing the curve of her neck, as if memory itself was flowing in reverse. "I'm not opening this gate for destiny," she whispered. "I'm opening it for the freedom to choose." And the light exploded, not with triumph, but with the awakening of a soul at last set free. The gate of Arcanos closed behind Victoria, sealing the silence with a shiver that echoed like the breath of the universe itself. Everything unraveled, then began to reassemble. The light withdrew to a single point. Alexander, standing alone before the core. The pendant was no longer in her hand. It now rested on a wooden table, suspended in the space between two heartbeats of reality. No one told him what to do. No map, no guidance. Only one question remained. Hold on, or let go. A wind swept in from the quantum rift, carrying the scent of salt water and the distant sound of a child's laughter from a dimension far away. Then came Genevieve's final message, layered in static, barely holding together. If the gate is a curse, then your heart may be the key. Alexander closed his eyes, and in that breath, he was no longer a fisherman, no longer the outsider. He was the last gatekeeper, not for power, not for legacy, but because he believed what remained, what mattered, was humanity. He stepped forward, placed his hand on the navigation core, and turned it gently toward sealed. A closing sound followed, soft as a heartbeat fading to stillness. Not an ending, a choice. Final scene. Seabrook Hollow at dawn. On a weathered wooden table by the sea, the pendant rests, coated in dew. Alexander sits nearby, calloused hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, eyes gazing toward the horizon. His face calm, at peace, and a deep voice drifts in like a prayer whispered through time. We can't control every branch of reality, but we can choose where we belong. Inside the oracle core, streams of spiraling energy churn like a sky splitting in two. Reality fractured, futures overlapped, tangled like threads pulled taut across dimensions. And at the center of it all stood Victoria. Her eyes traced each reflection of herself, the destroyer, the savior, and the frightened child she once was, hiding beneath it all. Alexander held her hand. No more explanations, no more guidance from Oracle, just a single choice, waiting to be touched, open or erase. He whispered, voice barely louder than the hush of rain. We don't need all realities, just one, kind enough to survive. Victoria looked at him. Her eyes stayed dry, but every layer of memory, every life lived across 1,000 timelines, rushed back in like a tide of recognition. She placed her hand on the console, but not to open the gate. She chose to preserve. The oracle core contracted, like a dying star collapsing into light. Every portal slammed shut, except one, the smallest one, the one where humanity still had the right to choose. Final image. Seabrook Hollow, an autumn morning. Wind drifts gently across the cliffs. On a wooden table, the pendant rests quietly beside a cooling cup of coffee. Victoria and Alexander sit together. No words, just the silence between them and the sea beyond, where once all realities converged, and now only one remains, a final voice soft and steady as sunrise. Some gates never need to be opened because we've already found the way home. When the light from the gate of Arcanos closed, there was no explosion, no chaos, only a hush, like the universe had exhaled softly. The entire room dissolved into millions of shards of light, drifting on quantum winds toward the edge of the horizon. Alexander stood still, his hand wrapped tightly around Victoria's. He didn't understand everything, about the gate, about Oracle, about the choice they'd just made. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was no longer alone, and neither was he. In that final moment, Victoria turned gently, kneeling to place the pendant on the ground. Not in surrender, but in gratitude, a quiet punctuation mark at the end of a looped reality. Seabrook Hollow. That morning, the ocean lay still as glass. On a small wooden table near the old fishing pier, the pendant remained, glistening under the soft morning sun. No one remembered exactly what had happened, but somehow every soul, from the elderly gatekeeper to the child selling bread at sunrise, suddenly knew where they belonged. Not because of power, not because of fate, but because they had chosen kindness. We don't need a perfect universe. We just need one place where people still believe in each other. And if you're still here, reading these final words, It means your heart has traveled a journey logic could never measure. So tell me, if you could keep just one reality, what would you choose to hold on to? Don't forget to hit subscribe if you'd like to walk with us through more stories of healing, just like Seabrook Hollow held on to you. Thank you for choosing to stay. It all began with a storm. A nameless woman washed ashore in Seabrook Hollow, carrying nothing but a pendant and a pair of eyes that had never truly seen the light of this reality. Victoria Langley didn't know who she was, but through her journey alongside Alexander Pierce, a quiet fisherman living at the edge of the sea, she discovered something deeper. Sometimes we don't need memories to know who we are. Sometimes all it takes is the ability to choose. Amid quantum gates, conspiracies, and the hunt from forces that twisted time itself, it wasn't the science or the technology that changed the course of everything. It was the small human acts, the silent sacrifices, the fragile trust born in hopelessness that rewrote reality. Genevieve Clark, a doctor who gave up certainty to protect a stranger. Alexander, a man with no power who chose to stay, not because he understood, but because he felt. And in the end, the pendant was placed back on an old wooden table. No one remembered exactly what had happened, but people loved each other. Just a little more, laughed more softly, lived more meaningfully. The lesson didn't come from quantum mechanics, from data, or from the future. It came from choice, the quiet reminder that even when we don't understand what's happening, we can still choose love. Because in a world that constantly spirals toward chaos, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is keep our hearts warm. And sometimes that is enough.